First of all, thank you all for coming. My name is Itamar, and I'm going to talk about the real estate market in Israel. I'm going to talk on 3 topics. First of all, the real estate market in Israel in general, a little bit of a brief overview, and then I'm going to talk about how to take a mortgage, and then about renting an apartment. But first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about me. So I'm 24 years old, currently living in Tel Aviv. I'm originally from Jerusalem. I am a former mortgage banker at Mizrahi Tfachot, which is the biggest mortgage bank in Israel. And for the past year and a half, I'm the real estate consultant for Olim in Gvahim. And I also have done a few courses on real estate investing and on mortgage and on being a mortgage advisor. So let's start. I'm going to talk a bit about a brief overview of where are the places you can live in. So Israel is actually, it's not really divided, but I divide it to 4 different places. First of all, you have the center of Israel, as you can see on the map. It's Netanya, Herzliya, Tel Aviv, of course, Tikva. And that's the biggest place in Israel, the most populated place in Israel. And then you also have Jerusalem, which is mainly Jerusalem, but also some cities are nearby, some smaller cities like the Shemesh, for example, and see on the map. You have the north, up in the north of Israel. You also have Haifa, which is the biggest city there, and a few smaller cities. And the north is much bigger, of course, than the area of Jerusalem and from the center. And the last, you have the south, which includes mainly Beersheba. It's the biggest city, and it's the biggest area in Israel, but it's also the least populated. And mainly you have Beersheba in it, and also Eilat at the end of it. And really in the south, it's the most south point in Israel. And now I'm going to talk about a little bit about each one in particular, just so you get a little bit of the understanding on it. So first of all, you have the center of Israel. As you can see, it's the green area in the map. The most expensive place in Israel is the center, but it has the most job opportunities than any other area. And that's why so many people live here. It's more than 4 million currently. Now, the average apartment price here is around 2 million shekels, which is expensive. And it really depends on where in the center, of course. It's for a 3-bedroom apartment, usually 4-bedroom. But it depends where in the center, just that you get the hang, just to understand the price point. And the renting price is around 6,000 shekels. And also, again, it depends where, but that's the basic idea. Of course, in Tel Aviv, everything is a little bit more expensive. Now, after the center, you have Jerusalem. That's the orange area, as you can see. And in contrast to the center of Israel, which is mostly secular, it has a very diverse population. It has secular Jews, religious Jews, and more Orthodox Jews. And it also has Arabs in it, in Jerusalem. So it's really more diverse. It has job opportunities, not as much as the center of Israel, but still it has. For example, all the government offices are in Jerusalem. So a lot of people work there, of course. Now, the average apartment price in Jerusalem is a little less than 2 million shekels. It's similar to the center, but still it's a little bit cheaper. And the average renting price depends on which neighborhood is around 5,000 shekels. And I see there is a question in the chat where in Tel Aviv there is an apartment that is cost 2 million shekels. It really depends. There are places in Tel Aviv, mostly in the south, but it's not specific on Tel Aviv, it's specifically on the center of Israel. There are cities, there are places you can buy an apartment there. And now that's Jerusalem. And now let's talk about the north. In the north, there is Haifa mostly and a lot of other smaller cities, but Haifa is the biggest city. As you can see, it's all the blue area on the map. And most of the job opportunities in the north are in Haifa. It has some high-tech jobs and also has 2 universities. And the average apartment price is around 1.2 million shekels, which is, as you can see, it's much cheaper than the center of Israel and than Jerusalem. It also has Also in the north, you have more private houses. And the average renting price is somewhere around 3.2 thousand shekels, something like that. Of course, it's an estimation, it's not, it depends where. And now, lastly, you have the south of Israel. So the south, as you can see, it's all the red area. It's the biggest area in Israel. And sadly, it has less job opportunities. It's less developed than the center and even from the north. And a lot of people or work in Beersheba or actually work in the center of Israel if they live in the south. And the average apartment price is around 1.2 million shekels. That's in Beersheba. But you can actually find much cheaper apartments. If you go, for example, 30 minutes south to Dimona, you can find apartments for 500,000 shekels for 2-3 bedroom apartments. And the average renting price is around 2.8 thousand shekels. That's the prices. So in the south, in the center, that's the price in Israel. It's expensive, to be honest. And I'm guessing you're all asking yourself why it is so expensive. So let's start talking about it. So why is the price so high? So first of all, just so you understand the difference from other countries to where you're going to, this is from 2014, the left, you can see how many average number of monthly salaries it takes to buy a home. In Israel, it's 148. And as you can see, the other are much less. And actually, it's from 2014. It got much higher in the last couple of years. And on the right, you can see the average prices. So as you can see, Tel Aviv is the most expensive. It's 2.5 million shekels now, and you can see how it rose in the last 20 years. And also you have the center, as you can see, it's very much near like Jerusalem in a green and a dark blue. And in Israel, in general, you can see the red line. So why is it so expensive? So there are only, I decided to talk about 4 reasons that I think are mainly important, for this. First of all, there are around 40 to 70,000 apartments that are built each year. But the growth of the population, because a lot of Israelis have, in comparison to other countries, a lot of kids, and there is a lot of new immigrants, then it is estimated that Israel needs to build around 80 to 100,000 apartments, new apartments each year to accommodate this growth. So it's not enough, as you can understand. And there are many real estate investors which drive the price up. That's because a lot of people come here, they want to invest because the real estate market is going up all the time. So that's what drives it up also. And in addition, there has been actually a low interest rate for many years, which makes it cheaper to buy a house by taking a mortgage. But actually now it's changing, the interest rate. Now it's going up in this time. So maybe it will change something. We don't really know. But now let's talk about the mortgage and why it is so important. So first of all, the mortgage, I see the questions. I'm going to answer it in a bit. So first of all, the mortgage is the most important tool to buy a house. Everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody, when they buy a house, they use a mortgage in Israel, because the prices are really expensive. Usually you don't have that amount in savings. But a mortgage is actually just a loan that is usually in order to buy a house. And it's the difference from regular loans is that it's up to 30 years, which is much longer than regular loans. And also, usually the interest rate is much less than in other loans because the bank has your house as a guarantee if something goes wrong. And another important thing, you can take up to 70% to 75% mortgage of the house's value. That's only for your first house. It has a different structure a little bit and different limitation if it's your second house or if you're taking it for something else. But I'm going to talk on your first house, because I'm guessing that's what's relevant for most of you. So let's start. I'm going to walk you through the steps of taking a mortgage now. So first of all, you have step one. It's getting the basic approval for a mortgage. You just talk to the bank, and they decide that what you say if you can get a mortgage. Step two is getting approval after giving all the relevant documents to the bank. The difference is that here you need to actually send the documents to the bank. And step three is getting approval for the mortgage. It's almost the final approval after signing the real estate agreement, after signing the contract. And then step four is the final approval when they actually release the money for you to use. So now I highly recommend, it's my recommendation, you don't have to follow it, not to sign the mortgage, not to sign the contract until you are after step two, because after step two, you can really have the feeling, you can really understand if you are going to get a mortgage from the bank. The bank actually decides by the document and not by what you are telling them. So now let's talk in each step in particular. First of all, step one, getting the basic approval for the mortgage. Now, I saw that you were asking it on the chat. In order to get a mortgage, you must be under 75 years old, but it's not exactly like that. What it actually means is that the mortgage, the payment for the mortgage must end until you are 75. Okay, so if, for example, I'm 55, I can take the mortgage for up to 20 years. So it will end when I'm 75, but if I'm 40, I can take it for 30 years. And second, you must have a good credit score. Okay, having a good credit score means no checks that came back, that you pay your loans in time, and no overdraft. And there is a new system in Israel with checks. It's similar to the USA, and I see that somebody has the banks here typically require new link to show pay statements. Yes, they sometimes do. It depends. They usually ask for the bank transcript so they can for 1 year actually. And you can check your credit score. There is a site. I will add it in the presentation and you can check it there. Now the monthly return, another important thing, the monthly return must be less than 40% of the available income. What it means actually is that after you get your salary, after you pay the other loans, you can only commit to paying the mortgage every month up to 40% of what it's left after you paid your other loans and got your salary. You can't pay any higher. Another important thing is to have no legal problems with the house. If you have any legal problems, some banks won't allow you to take a mortgage. It depends on which bank, but anyway, if the house has any legal problems, it will be more expensive because it will be riskier for the bank. And step one doesn't actually require any documents. What it does require is talking to the bank, to whichever bank you choose to talk to. And they ask you a lot of questions about yourself, and then they give you a page that says if you can get a mortgage and in what terms. The terms don't really matter. The interest rate is not really relevant at this stage because it's just the first stage and it's not the time to negotiate on it. So I see you ask 40% of the base salary or 40% of the salary after taxes. So it's 40% of the salary after taxes and after you paid other loans. For example, if you're taking a loan to buy a car, it's after the payment of this loan. So now step two is the approval after giving all the relevant documents to the bank. So it's actually same as step one, but now the banks decide by the documents to send them. And the banks ask for a lot of documents and you just need to send them. And then they decide by this if you're eligible for a mortgage. At this stage, usually the bank asks for an appraiser to check the house. So it's actually a very important stage. They give you a list of appraisers that you can go to, and then they come to the to the apartment you want to buy and give the value they think. Now, why it is so important? It's because the 75% that you can take as from the house's value, it depends by the amount you're going to pay for the owner to buy the apartment, and by the amount the appraiser says the house is worth. It's the lesser one between them. So that's important. And in this stage, you also get a guarantee from the bank to get a mortgage. It's not signed, it's not exactly a guarantee that you can go and here I have a mortgage, but it is, if you get through this step, usually you can get a mortgage if nothing else happens if nothing else, anything or not ordinary happens. And I really recommend here to get an approval from 2 to 3 banks, just so you get the interest rate that they are offering and understand which bank you want to start and negotiate with about the interest rate. So I saw that you have to buy when you're in Israel instead of buying before. So honestly, I really recommend buying when you're in Israel, but of course it's your choice. But you can also buy from abroad, it happens. So now let's talk about step 3. Step 3 is when you send the signed real estate agreement to the bank. And now what's important about this step is it's the time to negotiate on the interest rate and to structure the mortgage as you please and to really negotiate it hard. So what I want to add here, first of all, is that there are a lot of mortgage advisors in Israel. They usually charge between 6,000 shekels to 15,000, something like that. I really recommend, if you don't have a lot of an understanding in the mortgage market in Israel, to take a mortgage advisor, since although it's a very big payment and it sounds a lot of money, if you take a mortgage for 1 million shekels, for example, they can save you hundreds of thousands of shekels by talking with the bank and negotiating for you and understanding to which bank to go to. So now I'm going to talk to you about the interest rate, how it is decided, and what are the components of the mortgage that you can take. So first of all, the interest rate. So the interest rate is actually decided by 3 main factors. First of all, the bank's policy. So the interest rate by the bank is it's really decided by the Bank of Israel's interest rate. As you can see in the graph, it was a little bit higher in 2014, and then it dropped for the past 6 years, and now it's climbing up again. What you need basically to know about it is that the higher the interest rate of Bank of Israel, the higher the interest rate you will get on the mortgage. And that's actually not decided by you at all. That's how it works. And you have also you, the client. So now the bank, what you need to remember, the bank wants to earn money and he wants to do it with the least possible risk he can. So when you go to take a mortgage, they check, as I said, your credit score. If you are, for example, if you're taking it alone or with 2 people, it can also depend on that, because if you're 2 people that are paying the mortgage, it's less riskier for the bank. And now you also have the last thing, which is the deal. That's really important for the bank to make sure that, first of all, they know they can sell the apartment if something happens, that in this area there is high demand, so it's less riskier for the bank, and how much percentage of the house's value you're taking the mortgage. The less the percentage, the cheaper the interest rate, the lower interest rate will be. For example, if you're taking 75% or 30%, the 30% will have less interest rate. So those are the main 3 factors for the interest rate. Of course, at the start, when you're talking with the bank, they will give you high interest rate in the start, and then you need to really negotiate on it. It's really important to negotiate in Israel. So now let's talk about the mortgage structure, how the mortgage is structured, and the different component it's the loan. It's a little bit technical. Now, Fabian, I'm going to talk about it right now. So you have the different components you can take, and you can mix them in the mortgage. So the first component, it's the least risk for you, but also the highest interest rate because it's the least risk for you. It's a fixed interest rate tied or not tied to the consumer price index. So actually in here, you decide on an interest rate with the bank, and then you pay it for all the loan. It doesn't change at all. And you can take it up to 30 years. Now, the second one is a change in interest rate every certain period. It can be 2, 3, 5, or 7 years. Usually, that's what people take. And as it says, every couple of years, it changes. And that's a little bit more risky for you to take because you don't really know if it will go higher or lower. And now the next popular components a lot of people take is the prime interest rate. The prime interest rate is decided by the bank. It's the interest rate of the Bank of Israel, and you add to it 1.5%. That's the basic prime interest rate. And then there is, of course, a margin you can play with. It can be a little bit lower, a little bit higher. It depends on how good is the deal for the bank, how the client, as I said before. And now another important thing about these three interest rates, those are the most popular. And also what's important is in the fixed interest rate, if you have by any chance you took a loan with the mortgage with the fixed interest rate and you have suddenly a substantial amount of money to close the mortgage, sometimes you have to pay a fine to close it if it's fixed interest rate because you're kind of breaking the deal you made with the bank because you get all the money they were supposed to get. And also it can be on the change in interest rate, you have a fine, but when the interest rate is changing, then you can close it without a fine. And the prime interest rate doesn't have a fine because it actually changes every 3 months when the Bank of Israel changes its interest rate. So another important interest rate, but not a lot of people use it. It's the labor interest rate. It's for foreign currency, in dollars, euros you can take usually, but not a lot of people use it because if you live in Israel, then you don't want your loan to be decided by the dollar, the changes in the dollar, the changes in the euro. So it's not really popular. And of course, as I said, you can take a mix of the components. Okay, you can choose usually with some limitation how to structure it. Usually, actually, a recommended structure that a lot of people take, but it really depends on what you want, is to take third fixed interest rate, third changing interest rate for 5 years, for example, and a third of prime interest rate. That way you minimize the risk and also try to minimize the interest rate to lower it a little bit. So that's the structure. And now after you structure the mortgage, you negotiated, you or your mortgage advisor, you can get the mortgage from the bank and use the money in order to buy the apartment you wanted to. And that's the final stage, of course. And now let's talk about the necessary payments in the process. So there are 4 payments. First of all, the bank makes you do a life insurance and a house insurance, because if something happens to you, they want to make sure that you can actually pay it. And house insurance for the bank, it's their asset also, so they want it to be insured. You can do it or through the bank or through any insurance agency, which is actually recommended because the bank usually charges more than other insurance agencies. The appraiser, as I said in step 2, it costs around 2,000 shekels and you have to pay it. And there is also a payment for taking the mortgage when you sign it. It costs now, it was actually higher in the past years, but now there is a new rule. It costs 360. And yeah, I will repeat my recommendation. It's really whatever you want to do, but our regular structure is a third of taking fixed interest rate, a third of changing interest rate, and a third of prime interest rate. But it really depends on how you want to structure it. So now let's talk about the benefits you have as Olim in Israel. So first of all, the loan you can get is from 50,000 to 250 shekels. And it depends on the years you're in Israel, the military service, if you're single, if you have kids. It depends on a lot of stuff. There is a link to a calculator in the end where you can check it for yourself. The interest rate is 3% for 10 to 30 years. You decide, of course, on the years. And really important stuff about it is that with it, the mortgage can exceed 75% of the house's value. What it actually means is that you can take the mortgage 75% and then take this extra loan, which will also be for the house. And by doing this, it's really important because you can bring less savings from your own. And another important thing that if you by any chance you can pay the mortgage, something happens, it's very hard for the bank to sell the house if the mortgage is not paid, if you took this loan. So it's really important to know that. And again, as I said, you have the calculator in the end, in the links, that you can check it. And now let's do a shift in the subject and talk about renting. Just a question, is there any down payment? You don't pay, when you buy a house, you have to pay to the owner, but there isn't any down payment for the mortgage or anything, if that's what you meant. So I really recommend, before I start talking about it, first renting an apartment and then buying, because you want to know where to live, and renting a house is it's not as a commitment as buying a house, of course. So I'm going to talk about a few things. First of all, finding an apartment to rent, how to find it in Israel. Then I'm going to talk about what to check in the area, what to check in the apartment, and what to check in the contract. And of course, I'm going to talk a little bit about benefits in rent for Olim. So first of all, my recommendation, I highly recommend it. I tell it to everybody I meet and that I consult to. You should really start, especially if you don't know Israel, please take an Airbnb in the start if you can, or even subletting, just that you get the understanding of where you want to live, because most of the contracts in Israel are for 1 year. And by subletting, which means actually to rent from the renter, you can rent it for a few weeks, maybe a month, and to get the feeling of the area. So I highly recommend it. Of course, it's your choice, but that's my recommendation. So now let's talk about, first of all, how to find an apartment to rent. So you have a few options. First of all, Facebook groups. Facebook groups, I think, are the most convenient tool, and it will help you to find an apartment the most, because for every city you want, you just need to search in Facebook, apartments for city in, for example, Tel Aviv, then use Google Translate on the sentence, and then you get the apartments, and then you get a lot of Facebook groups that have a lot of apartments, especially if you're looking with roommates. That's basically almost the only option. So that's very important. And then you have two sites. The biggest site is Yad 2, and usually from abroad, you need to use a VPN in order to access it. It has the most advertised apartments for rent and also to buy if you're interested. And then you also have Madlan, which has also apartments to buy and to rent. And it also has some information about each neighborhood, about the average prices. And if you have friends and family in Israel, then of course you can use their help. And you can also use a realtor if you need. They usually charge you for 1 month of rent. And if you need it, you can use it. They can be very helpful, but take into account how much they charge and if it's right for you, because you don't really have to use them if you come to Israel. And now, what to check in the area. So first of all, public transport in Israel in most places is not so good. So if you're applying not to use a car, please check that you're close by to a bus station or to a train station, then that you have good public transport nearby. And if you're planning to use a car, check for a parking space. Not all apartments have a parking space, and in some places in Israel, especially in the center and in Jerusalem, it's very hard to find a parking place if you don't have your own parking space. And also an important thing is if you want to live in a secular or religious neighborhood. So you have different neighborhoods in Israel, they have a different atmosphere. And in religious neighborhoods, for example, everything is closed on Saturday. And in some Orthodox neighborhoods, you can't even drive on Saturday with the car. So it's important that you understand where you want to live and in which neighborhoods. And of course, the level of the schools, if you have any children, it really depends on where the schools they go to, depend, of course, on where they live. So also check that. So I hear you ask where we can find information about the areas in the levels of school and public transportation and parking. So public transportation is not so easy to check. You need to actually go to the area usually. You can use Google Maps, but it's not really best. And to check the level of schools, it's in Madlen, you have an option to check it. So the safety of the neighborhoods, it's not, most of Israel is really safe, but for example, you have a few neighborhoods in Beersheba, which are a little bit not so safe at night. So also check it in advance and understand the neighborhood. It's really important. So now what to check in the apartment? First of all, a lot of apartments don't come with any furniture. It's really something that most apartments don't come with. So usually check it in advance if it comes with anything, if you can buy the furniture from the tenants that are living, or that it comes with everything maybe. Just check in advance and know that you may have to spend money in order to buy the furniture. And for me, I put here, is there air conditioner, how good it is? I really suffer from heat, and in the summer in Israel can be very hot, especially in the center of Israel and in the south. So check the air conditioner and if it's good. And also check the other bills. You have other bills you're going to pay in addition to the rent, electricity, water, and municipal rate. So check in advance how much are they. You can talk with the tenants that are living or with the owner. And also ask why are the previous tenants living when you talk with them, when you are talking with them, because maybe there is a good reason, and this reason will also drive you out of the apartment, and then you can minimize the risk for you by hearing what they have to say. And also, if the apartment comes with a realtor, some apartments in Israel come with a realtor, and then you need to pay him also 1 month of rent. So check it in advance and know about it. In Tel Aviv, it's mostly popular in Tel Aviv, but also in some other big cities. And now let's talk about a little bit of what to check in the contract. So those are the 4 things I usually recommend to check to everybody I talk to. First of all, make sure, this is the most important thing, the apartment owner is in charge for any repairs caused by reasonable wear and tear. What it basically means, put it in the contract first of all, what it basically means is that if anything breaks, that's not your fault. For example, a water pipe or maybe the electricity, something happened to it and it's not your fault, you don't have to pay for it. And the owner should pay for it as fast as he can. Also put that it should be in a reasonable time. You can discuss about it in the contract, but really it's important to put it. And another thing to put is an option for extending the contract for another year or more if you like the apartment, and if you don't know yet actually, but if you like it and you want to spend another year in it, if you had an option, they can't raise the prices as much as they want. It's listed in the contract how much they can raise it. For example, usually you list that you can rent the apartment by an addition of 3% to the rent. So it's really important. And I see that Alexandra wrote something very important, that really rented apartments don't come with appliances like washing machine, dryers, or even refrigerators. It's true, most apartments don't come with anything, only sometimes air conditioner, and that's basically it. So yeah, you should put it in your budget. By the way, a lot of the furniture, if you're looking for secondhand, you can find in Facebook or in Yad too. And another important thing to check in the contract is the amount of money they ask you for deposit and which type. There are a few types they can ask for and different amounts. Of course, you can negotiate on it. And it's really important that you check in advance and negotiate them. And there are a few monthly rent payment options. You can pay with checks in advance. And on the other hand, you can pay with a bank transfer, write it in the contract, make it so you can decide which way you're going to pay, of course, if the owner agrees. So that's what I really recommend to check in the contract. Please check it when you're renting an apartment. So now you have a little bit of benefits for rent in Rent for Olim. So in certain cities, you can get money for rent. I have a list that I put in the end that you can check in which city you can get. The help in rent starts from the 8th month in Israel until the 5th year. And it ranges from 100 to 800 shekels per month. You can check it also. I put a link in the end in order to check it for you. It again depends, really depends if you're a single family or not. And you get a 90% discount on municipal rate, which for the first year, for the first 12 months of 24 months. And it really can save you a few hundred shekels each month. And there are absorption centers in Israel that you can, it's not for everybody, but you can find sometimes an apartment there. It comes furnished and it's usually cheaper from renting. And also put a link in there, you can check it. So that's the benefits in Rent for Olim that you have. And lastly, very important, I really want to stress it out. Negotiate, please. Whenever you're in Israel, remember, it's like a market. The mortgage market is really like a market in every way. You can negotiate with the banks as much as you would like, just be polite, but it's something that happens, it's something that people do. And also on the renting price, negotiate it. So those are the links. In the first link, I just want to say there is many information about mortgage. It's a really popular site in Israel on mortgage. It's in Hebrew, but just use Google Translate. It's really good knowledge. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed and learned something. Thank you very much. See, you have a few questions. So how do these contracts work with subletting? Actually, it's usually, you don't really sign a contract. A lot of the time, you just talk with the person that is renting and you just go into the apartment for the time that you decided upon. And you usually also pay everything, including the bills, but usually just they tell you how much to pay. You don't have to use it. I see you ask any specific tips for Olau is also a university student. Actually, there aren't so much. Sometimes you can live dorms and it will be cheaper, but that's basically it.
I really recommend for you to check out Chahak. It's for students or Olim Chadashim, and you can get up to 10,000 shekels a year if you're doing volunteering, and it's specifically for new Olim. Itamar, thank you so much. So we'll do a few things, and Itamar said the most important things. I'll give you some more tips on that from the Ministry of Absorption side also. And now we'll start from me. So really nice to meet all of you. My name is Inna. I'm 31 years old. I'm not that Ola Chadasha. And we made Aliyah from former Soviet Union almost 30 years ago to Israel. And the first thing we're gonna talk today is about money and opening a bank account here and to know the system a little bit. So your first financial steps in Israel should be open a bank account here in Israel. And it's easy, but sometimes it can be few steps and you need to know them. So the first row is the biggest banks in Israel. The second row is the smallest banks in Israel, the smaller actually. Choose banks by distance to you and read about them before, what they're offering you as an Zoleh Hadash. It's really important. When you chose a bank, this is your steps when you're coming to open a bank account for you. Teudat Oleh will be required. I know that some banks will ask for Teudat Zehut, but you're not going to get it until at least 30 days here in Israel. So Teudat Oleh is enough, and you need to insist on that. Sometimes they can give you a hard time about it. Make an appointment with your bank. Don't just walk in. When you choose the bank that you want to be part of it, download the app or just go online and schedule a meeting with them because they're not accepting just walk-ins. An account opening form must be signed by the bank clerk. This form is really, really important for you because you're giving it back to the Ministry of Absorption, and then they know how, when to, and where to pay actually the Sal Klita that you're entitled to get. So it's really important to get this form, and it's your duty to get it back to your account at the Ministry of Absorption, Misrad HaKlita, not the bank. It's on you. So it's really important to know that. And something that was made in the past few days, and it should be starting today, that you can go there and you don't have to bring all the family with you. I'm still suggesting to do that because if you are married and you want to open a bank account for both of you, please go the two of you. Don't go just one of you because they can give you a hard time about it also. Cash in Israel when you're coming to Israel. I know that Alim from Russia right now, you can get out of Russia with a lot of money, but Alim from other countries, you're coming here with more than 50,000 shekels in cash. You have to declare it. If you're not declaring that, that's a felony. So if you're coming with this, please, I'll send you the link later. You need to file a form to declare that. And when you're coming into Netbak, you have the green line and you have the red line, and you have to go through the red line and to say, yes, I have to declare this money. If it's less than 50,000 shekels, you don't have to do that. You're just going inside with the money inside of Israel. And also, if you have this as a big amount of money, you need to have the papers that shows where is the origins of this money are coming from. If you have a small business, if you sold something, if you sold an apartment, if you sold your business, if you had, I don't know, anything, you have to have the documents with you. I know that a lot of Alim are still doing remote work when they're coming to Israel because they're afraid to quit their old job and they want to be in Israel with their old job. It requires few things from you, and you need to know that before starting that or just continuing to work like that. If you're working remotely with a non-Israeli company, you must verify whether the country has a tax treaty with Israel. There's some countries that don't have it, and you need to pay double taxes in your origin country and here in Israel. Also, I know that a US citizen, if you have an independent small business, you have to pay double taxes. For example, Poland has a trade with Israel, so you don't have to pay double taxes. In order to be eligible for benefits, you must pay taxes and national insurance. National insurance is Bituach Leumi. If you don't pay Bituach Leumi, you don't get the benefits that all the Israeli citizens get, like insurance, health insurance, or when you're not working and you're getting money from them and stuff like that. So make sure that if you're still getting paid from abroad, that you're paying here Bituach Leumi in order to get all the benefits ahead. Your income from work or an apartment abroad must be reported to the Israeli Revenue Services. Even if it's just your old apartment that you're renting to someone and you're getting money to your Israeli bank account every month, you need to declare that money. And you need to have also the paperwork for this, because the bank can ask you that, and they actually obligated by law to submit all this information to the International Revenue Services, and they can just pull you. Deposits from abroad can be made into your Israeli bank account. Just make sure you have the references to the source of the funds. Again, as I said, especially if it's more than 50,000 shekels. If you do brought more than 50,000 shekels or even less, around like 40 or 30, something like that, when you're going to the bank the first time and you want to deposit the money, make sure you don't deposit everything in one withdrawal. You need to do it like in cuts, like 10,000 shekels, and you can see how the bank processes it and how long it takes it, and if they ask questions. And later on, like 2 or 3 weeks later, you can go and put the rest of the money in. Don't put everything, even though you're allowed to do that by law, they're still gonna ask a lot of questions, and sometimes they can just make a hold on your bank account, and you don't want that. I know that Itamar already talked about tips on housing. I have few tips from the Ministry of Absorption side, how to report the income from abroad. You have actually specific forms for this. Do we have to bring and translate the IRS declaration for the banks? I don't think you need the IRS declaration, just something that proves that, I don't know, it's your business, it's your house, like contract leases or something like that. The 50K is per person usually, but children don't count. So it's usually for adults. For few apartment rental tips, the Itamar already talked about them, but there's really something small important that I really want to notice, that sometimes if this is your first apartment in Israel and you're checking the area and you're not sure, make sure that you have in your lease agreement that you can do an early termination to the contract, and make sure that this closure is going both sides, for you and for the lessor side, that he can just kick you out without any notification ahead out of the apartment. And something really important, when you're going to open your first bank account, make sure that you're buying some checks, because checks are the most common form of payment here in Israel for apartments. I know that it's a little bit old-fashioned, but this is how it works here. And for housing, for buying, I know that a lot of you ask ahead about the lottery. New Olim are not entitled to go inside of the lottery because you have to live at least 3 years here in Israel before you enter the lottery. But you do have a lot of other benefits. You are entitled to reduced purchase tax. And the state of Israel also provides a lot of assistance. You can also get a mortgage out of the Misrad HaKlita and Misrad HaBinui VaShikun. Misrad HaBinui VaShikun is actually the construction ministry, and they have special terms for Olim Chadashim. This is the calculator that Itamar was talking about. You can see that if you're living here for 1 year, for 2 years, for 3 years, the points you get are higher. If you have kids, if you served in the military, the points that you get are higher. And I think this is a really important also point to make, that public housing is not really a common thing here in Israel, but they are available for immigrants in certain circumstances, for extensions, if you came with someone who is disabled, or your mishpacha atzma'it, which means only a mom or only a dad, and you're raising your children, you're also entitled to ask to be part of it. In order to get to those lists, you need to meet with your absorption person in Misrad HaKlita. He can write you down inside of that. He can help you to see, and also to explain to you if you are entitled or not, because they're changing it all the time. What is the lottery? The lottery is basically for couples, for young couples or people who are above, if I remember correctly, 35 years old, who are not married and still doesn't have an apartment here in Israel. So they're doing a lottery for reduced price apartments. But as I said, Olim Chadashim are not entitled for that.
I have a question.
Yes.
You talked about people bringing up to 50,000 shekels. This is for people coming from Western countries. They bring a lot more. So how do you transfer a large amount of?
Sure. So the best advice is don't bring it as cash. Opening your bank account here in Israel, give it a few weeks, like 1, 2, or 3, to see that everything is fine and you're getting your payments from the Misad Klita and that it's working, and then you can do the transfer. Be sure to have a papers with you that prove where this money is coming from. Is it you sell an apartment, so you have an agreement? I'm sorry, or you have any kind of documents that prove that your money is legal. Again, it depends on the country that you're coming from and the trade that we have with them. Usually, no, because they realize this is your savings. And sometimes just the bank taking some commission for handling it, but it's not taxes as proper. Any tips about saving accounts this time? I'm not a certified banking that I can give you tips. Like, I don't want to take this responsibility. Just make sure that inflation here in Israel is really going high. So saving accounts inside of the bank, it's not that much of a money. That's all I can say. Beside of that, it's you need to hire someone because we're not allowed to give you these tips. What kind of documents do you need to transfer money? Do you have to translate from Spanish? I'll say yes, because not everybody here do understand Spanish or read Spanish. If you can just translate it to, it doesn't have to be even Hebrew, just to English. If it's like you have an agreement that you have an apartment and you are renting it to someone, so you have the lease, or you sold something, so you have the contract for that, this is kind of documents you need to have with you. Ahead declaration, what that means, it's just a form that you're filling and you have to have with you when you're coming to Israel on the amount of money that you have, the origins of the money, and that you know that you're bringing this amount here and they can check this out. Is it possible to use credit cards from foreign bank accounts here in Israel? Not all credit cards will work here. Most of them does, but it will just be a higher percentage. Itamar, am I right? Because you work in a bank.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
As I said, the recording is published on Gvahim Academy. You go through the link of Aliyah Prep, through the webpage of Aliyah Prep, and then there is link to Gvahim Academy, and you can have a lot of information. There is also a contract for renting an apartment in Israel in different languages. So, and this is the contract of Tel Aviv municipality. So, I mean, it's legal. You can actually ask for the person that will rent you the apartment to use this contract. But even if they prefer another contract, at least you will be able to see it. So thank you all for amazing evening. Thank you, Itamar. Thank you, Inna. It was really, really special and very, very important. And I know that many people waited for that. And we will continue to see one another in the program. So bye.